I have a surprise for you.
You have a surprise for me?
I do.
You're finally getting Botox.
Where?
Oh, that's not the
Where?
surprise. Where do you
Where do
need
I need
it?
Botox?
No, you're fine with all those forehead wrinkles. Don't even worry about it.
Oh my God. You're not getting your surprise. How about that?
Okay, I'm sorry. I take it back. Your forehead is smooth.
It's too late. No one, including you, is ever going to know what the surprise is. So too bad. So sad.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Murder Unscripted. I am your host, Ed Hydock, along with my partner in crime, the great and powerful Melissa Spivey.
Oh, I like that.
It's good, huh? Every week you get a new title.
I know, it's great.
So last week we heard Melissa kind of walk us through an incredible case out of Washington, D.C., the Gallaudet University, where a man named Thomas Minch was suspected in a gruesome double murder, which rocked the college for the deaf to their very cores. And we talked a little bit about the fallout of spending most of your life being pegged as a murderer, sometimes even after they caught the real perpetrator, when in reality, this person had nothing to do with it. And I think we started to get a glimpse of what kind of ramifications that has. And we're going to get some more this week and next week, definitely. So today we're going to be continuing our theme by sharing with you a case I produced for Cold Case Files. It was a few years back. I don't remember the exact year. I want to say 2020, 2021. And it's an incredibly sad and frustrating case out of the Tar Heel State, North Carolina. And for this one, the time machine may need some extra fuel, Melissa. I hope you packed gas because you have to go all the way back to 1984. I know you weren't born yet, but
I was not born. You were. You definitely were.
I definitely was.
All right. Well, then let's get in our time machine. We'll go back to 84, where the hair was big, the eyeshadow was blue, and the clothes were neon. Whoa, I liked that. That was intense.
Who knew in a murder podcast that you'd be time traveling?
That was intense. All right. Well, we are now in 1984, and the top song is "When the Doves Cry" by none other than Prince, or the
Back up.
artist formerly known as
When Doves Cry.
"When the Doves Cry."
There's no the.
Are you sure?
I would bet my head wrinkles that
Well, no, now I gotta check. All right, so the top song of 1984 was "When Doves Cry" by Prince, or the artist formerly known as.
yeah, he was like
sure.
a symbol for a while. He was just like
Yes.
symbol.
Well, that was the top song. The top movie that year was the original Ghostbusters.
Amazing. We just watched
was
that.
a classic. Yeah, so good. All right, so Ed, you were a kid in 1984. I'm not sure if you had one of these, but maybe you were playing with your Cabbage Patch doll, which was the hot toy that year.
Don't they smell like, is it powder?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I ever had one, but
Find one and smell it. Like to this day, smell it.
That's weird.
I know it's weird, but just smell it. I'll bet you money it smells like powder.
I believe you, but I'm gonna Google it.
Okay.
Fun fact on Cabbage Patch Kids, I had an ex who told me I looked like one, and it's not wrong. It's like at first I was like, no, I don't, and then I was like,
exactly
oh,
what you
I
look
do.
like.
Yeah, pull up a blonde Cabbage Patch Kid, and it's like twinsies.
But you smell like cabbage, not powder.
It's true. It's also true. Anyway, in regards to North Carolina in 1984, If you actually like Google North Carolina in 1984, which is what I did, the first couple pages of Google are just all about these series of like horrible tornadoes. Like 14 tornadoes hit in one
Oh my
day on
God.
March 28th, 1984, and it just like devastated both North and South Carolina. And
Wow.
Jim Hunt, who was North Carolina's governor at the time, he actually said, quote, "It was the worst natural disaster we've had in 100 years in North Carolina." And
Unreal.
so that's what was going on in 1984.
Wow. Well, let's jump back to 2024.
Beep
So-
boop, beep boop.
I like that better than what I did anyway. So I want to deviate a little bit from the way I usually tell stories because I love telling them like TV docs where you start with something juicy and just really hook it. But I want to start this one a little bit different because I think it's important for everyone to know who we're talking about and what the situation was so that we can better understand the crime and the topic, the subject matter that we're covering. So, our victim in this case is 15-year-old Reesa Trexler, who was described as the perfect blend of sweet and sassy. Reesa was a spitfire who had an incredibly memorable laugh and smile. She could turn heads with her looks, but also punch you in the mouth if you talked shit on her friends. Reesa was incredibly popular in her little town, which at the time was very much racially and economically divided. And that's an important thing to remember because it does kind of play a role in this case, in the investigation. There were some railroad tracks that literally ran through the center of Salisbury, where there were sides of the tracks, black versus white, rich versus poor. And Reesa and her family, including her 13-year-old sister named Jody, lived on the lower middle class side of the tracks. But they didn't see race, color, creed. I mean, they had some of Reesa's best friends included a bunch of upper middle class folks, like this her pal Jim, and there was a poor Moroccan boy named Paul Rogers. Reesa had aspirations of becoming a preschool teacher after she graduated high school, but in the summer of 1984, she was still focused on enjoying her time out of the classroom. In fact, that's when all of this happened in 1984, and it was the kids' first week off of summer. And before we get too deep into the story, I want to tell you a little bit about the family's living situation. Reesa and her sister Jody had an incredibly strong bond. They lived with their mother, Vicky, in this little tiny bungalow on North Shaver Street. But what was really cool about this bungalow, it was like Reesa's grandparents were in the same little lot. It was this little corner of Shaver, and I don't know the cross street, but you could throw a rock, literally. And the girls would bounce back and forth. It was almost like an open door policy between the two houses. So at any point, the girls could just leave their house, go over to their grandmother's for dinner, and come back. It was this little tiny kind of family community in Salisbury. So very cool. Like, I don't know many people that get to do that.
That is very cool. And to have that relationship with your grandparents is just great.
It's true. Very true. So, on the sweltering hot afternoon of June 14th, 1984, Reesa, Paul, and Jim were hanging out watching MTV. And this is cool because they were one of the few houses that had cable. And MTV was still relatively new. I want to say 1981, maybe?
I think
MTV
so,
show.
yeah.
They basically had the cool house. Reesa, that was the place that everybody wanted to hang out. So on that afternoon, these kids are just kicking back, rocking out to Prince and Van Halen at the time. Reesa offers to make everyone some sandwiches. And the friends continue hanging out until about 3 o'clock. And that's when Reesa tells them, she's like, my stories are coming on. And I wanted to ask you, are you old enough, Melissa, to know what I mean when I say her stories were on?
That's like soap operas, right?
It is soap operas, yes.
Okay,
My grandmother did this every day between 3 to 5. It was like Guiding Light. What were some of the other? General
Bold
Hospital.
and the Beautiful.
Bold
General
and the
Hospital.
Beautiful. Yes. Oh my.
Young
my
and the
stories.
Restless.
My stories are on. So while Reesa watches her soap, Paul and Jim, they take off. They're like, we're not watching soap operas. So MTV was cool.
Fair.
Soap operas not cool. I'm out. So they leave, and Jody was actually still in the house. She was in her room chilling, just she's kind of reading a magazine, enjoying the summer breeze. And around 4 o'clock, when her soap opera's over, Reesa then heads over to her grandparents' house right next door. Shortly thereafter, Jody realizes that the house was awfully quiet. Their parents, I should say, were out running errands. So they kind of had the house to themselves. So Jody realizes she hadn't heard from her sister in a while. It'd been about an hour. So she goes over to her grandparents' house to kind of check on her. And as she approaches the house, she's walking across the yard. she notices the grandparents' car is not in the driveway. The front door is closed, too. And that's usually a sign that they were out. Maybe Reesa was over there with them they were out somewhere running errands together.
Right.
So Jody didn't think anything of it. She assumes that's what they were doing, and she heads back inside and flops back down on her bed and continues reading. So then, around 5 o'clock, so this is about an hour after Reesa had left to go over to her grandparents, Jody is still on her bed and she hears a blood-curdling scream coming from her grandparents' house. And it's her grandfather, Walt Monroe. And Walt was running from the front door, dropped to his knees right on the front lawn. So Jody rushes outside to kind of see what happened, and Walt won't tell her, won't say a word. He just says, "Call for help, Jody, hurry." So Jody kind of does as she's told. She runs back to her house and dials 0. These are the days before 911, so she actually called the operator.
God.
Yeah, it was just straight 0. And she's not sure what to tell him, though, because she doesn't know what happened.
I was just thinking that, like, what exactly would you say? Because the 911 operator, that's the first thing they're going to ask. What is your, what's going on?
Yeah. And I'm not sure what actually Jody told her, but I don't even know if Jody would remember because it was such a blur. But so they send police and emergency personnel to 714 North Shaver. Meanwhile, Jody rushes back over to the house, and her grandparents, especially Walt, is standing in the doorway of the house. So she goes inside, and he's in the hallway, kind of blocking her from seeing what's in that bedroom. And Jody actually pushes past her grandfather, and that's when she sees an image that is essentially permanently ingrained in her mind. Her sister Reesa is lying on the floor of a spare bedroom, naked and drenched in blood.
Oh my God.
And Jody assumes her sister just had kind of a nasty fall, or maybe she punctured her ear while putting an earring in. Like, despite the volume of blood that was in that room, Jody had an innocent young teenager's explanation. She couldn't believe what she was looking at.
Absolutely. I think your brain tries to fill it in with something else. Like, that's the last thing your brain wants to think. So I think it tries to come up with 100 different things that it could be rather than what it is.
Right. And I think that's what happened here. And we'll hear all about it next week, kind of her experience with that. So reality eventually sets in, and Jody understands that Reesa is dead, and it's just the end of her world. I mean, everything is shattered. And Salisbury police officer Rick Thibodeau is one of the first to arrive at the scene. And I had interviewed Rick for the Cold Case Files episode, and I have to say I was, first off, very surprised that he agreed to participate. And you'll understand why as we go through this story. Mm-hmm. But Rick's memory was very sharp, and I will give him that. He was a very put together, very well-spoken, educated man who gave us his time, and his memory was sharp for a case that happened at that point 40 years ago. So, that tells me that the case always stuck with him. Like, if he remembered that much about a case, it stuck with him.
Yeah.
So, and one of the big takeaways from that interview was that Rick had 2 daughters, and one of them was around Reesa's age. So right there, I think people don't understand sometimes that the police are human too, and they're dealing with, yes, they're trained to, it's business. We were in the business of murder. We investigate things. They're cold. They're cut off from the world, but they can be emotional, especially when they can tie, just like we do sometimes, these cases to our personal lives. So.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, he's thinking about that could be his kid.
It definitely motivated him, but what you'll learn is that he did get some tunnel vision. And we were talking about that last week in Gallaudet, and he had no idea that he would be embarking on the longest, most grueling investigation in Salisbury history. So a closer look at Reesa's body reveals she'd been stabbed numerous times in the neck and chest with a great deal of force. I mean, this was a brutal, violent attack.
Wow.
And in fact, the knife that was used to stab her was still lodged in her right shoulder. Like, it wasn't quite in the floor. I had done a case about an old lady who was stabbed through her neck and the knife was stuck in the floor. Investigators had to. So it wasn't like that, but the knife was in her shoulder, her right shoulder. And there's blood spatter on one of the walls and just a pool of blood underneath her body. So someone clearly wanted Reesa to suffer, but not before having his way with her. And I say that because Detective Thibodeau isn't certain she'd been raped, but her clothing was scattered all over the floor and she's naked. So, I mean,
Yeah,
That's kind of a logical next step.
of
And
course.
right. And he's even more convinced when he finds in the blood pool that was under Reese's body there was kind of an unusual substance, and it appeared to be semen. So he technicians take a sample and they send it off to the lab for analysis. So a look around the place reveals no signs of forced entry, and nothing valuable appears to be missing. So this didn't appear at least to be a robbery. This appeared to be a sex crime, and a brutal one at that. So Thibodeau can only surmise that Reesa knew her attacker. Would you agree that this kind of feels like a personal, the overkill, you know?
Yeah, and stabbing is very personal because you're right up in their face. And real quick, just going back to what you said about she had a lot of stab wounds and they were deep. That to me equals at, at least someone strong. So I want to say a male because I don't think it's easy to stab someone. I think that takes some real work, especially to stab deep. So to me, I immediately thought it was a man.
Interesting. Well, the knife that was used, we're not sure where it came from, but it did appear to match they found a knife missing from the butcher block in the kitchen. So there was that.
So I feel like the first thing they're going to think is that was the murder weapon. So someone came in, grabbed it out of the butcher block and went and killed her. But that's crazy that like I feel like that's very opportunistic. Like they saw her, they saw the butcher block, they saw her and went from there.
Right, like you don't bring if you were prepared to do this, you would come prepared with a murder weapon. So
Or
I agree.
did the person know the house and they knew that the knives were going to be in the kitchen?
That's a really good point because that can often be that familiarity is a good indicator that the victim knew their attacker, and that's a great direction that police can start. This was one of the saddest parts of the story for me, and I actually don't remember how much we played it up in Cold Case Files, but it was a very emotional beat with Vicky Oakes, and that was Reesa and Jody's mom. She was out running errands, so imagine coming home to all this commotion, like around your parents' house. So that's when she learns what happens. And the second police kind of break the news, she drops her grocery bag. She was shopping, drops her bags, and just starts sprinting down the street like hysterically. And it took a neighbor to get in their car and kind of corral her, caught her like
Oh
a
my
mile
God.
away, just freaking out. And I feel like that's the reaction I would want to get as far away from that house as I possibly could.
I feel like that's fight or flight. Like,
Yeah.
she's like, I can't, nope, like maybe somewhere else this isn't happening. I need to get out of here.
Yep. So to start their investigation, detectives go door to door, asking neighbors if they saw or heard anything suspicious, and they did not. So investigators work off the theory that Reesa knew her attacker. And initially they do look into Jody's grandfather, Jody and Reesa's grandfather, Walt, the man who found the body, because it wouldn't be the first time that a suspect pretended to discover a body when, kind of to deflect suspicion off them. Some people insert themselves just to
Like last week where Joseph Mesa did the exact same thing.
Yep. And in that case,
Yeah.
he was the perpetrator.
Exactly.
And get this. So when questioned, Walt does say that he and his wife were out running errands, and at some point he dropped her off to get a haircut while he went grocery shopping.
So that means he was by himself for a little bit.
He was probably about 45 minutes, I'd say.
Oh,
So
that's enough time to go. I mean, maybe, I don't know where the store was, but that could be enough time, so I can see why they looked at him first.
but it was their grandfather,
Yeah.
I get it. This doesn't feel like the work of a grandfather to me.
No, I don't think so either.
Again, these shows put emphasis on people sometimes that police only do for a second, where we'll turn it into more than that. But in this case, Walt was ruled out very quickly. But I didn't want to skip over the fact that police did look at the person who found Reesa's body. So not even 24 hours after Reesa's murder, this little town of Salisbury is on edge. Just like every other little town in America, like it said, you hear it on every episode of every.
Yep.
No one locks their doors here, right? It was that kind of town, and police were still pounding the pavement looking for tips and looking for information. And they speak to a neighbor about a block away who says he recalls hearing a loud scream sometime between 4 when Reesa went over to visit her grandparents and 5 when her body was found. And not only that, the neighbor also recalls seeing a black man running down the street, but he said he couldn't make out any of the specific details. So police aren't really sure what to make of the tip.
He lived a block away, though. Like, if Jody was at her house, which was less than a football field away from the grandparents, right? Like,
Yep.
it was pretty close. I feel like she would have heard it before some guy a block away heard it.
Exactly. And she didn't say she heard anything, except that the only scream she heard was from her grandfather
Right.
finding Reese's body.
And not only that, but like you can say that he was an African American man, but you can't tell me what he's wearing.
Right. Something's
like
fishy about
else,
that too.
That's just weird.
Right. Well, remember how I said Salisbury was so divided at the time?
Yeah.
So the thought was that this tip had kind of racist undertones, and it sucks to say, but that this tipster was trying to maybe railroad a suspect of color is what I take away from it. And the notion became more glaring when police actually dig into the tipster himself and learn that he'd been released from prison just a few months earlier.
Oh.
I never did find out what for, but it doesn't change the fact that he did go to jail and was recently released. So was this guy making stuff up?
Maybe. I mean, do we know anything else about? I'm assuming if we don't know his name or what he was in prison for, he's not our guy.
You don't know that. Maybe I just haven't revealed his name yet.
All right. So what was his name?
Stephen.
You made that up.
I did.
Okay.
So we'll get this. So police actually do look into this neighbor for a hot second, a neighbor a block away, given his criminal history. And they bring him in for questioning, and he flat out denies having anything to do with this. He claims his tip was legit, and he even gives an alibi. He said he'd spent the day with a guy he met in prison. They were both out for some afternoon delight. Wink, wink.
Get it. Good for him.
Yeah, well, whatever the case, police were never really able to corroborate his alibi. So, but they do give him a polygraph, and he passes. So that was pretty much the end of that. So the day after Reesa's murder, her autopsy is performed by Dr. John Butts at nearby Chapel Hill. I had actually talked to Dr. Butts, and he agreed initially to participate, but as we got closer to shoot day, he called and said he really didn't remember enough about the case, and that's understandable. I mean, how many bodies has he seen and worked on? It's unless it's a really he knew he remembered it, but not enough to sit down for an interview. But we had his report. So based on that report, Reesa was stabbed numerous times in the head, chest, neck, and torso. Oof. And Dr. Butts also found trauma to Reesa's vaginal area and determined she was, in fact, sexually assaulted. However, there was no biological evidence found, at least not inside her. So remember that pool of blood and the substance that was found inside it. So the lab finds traces of semen belonging to an unidentified male. And every true crime fan worth their Netflix account knows that 1984 DNA's in its infancy. So there's only so much that can be done at the time. They had blood typing, they had certain things like that, but nothing even close to what we do today.
I mean, I'll give them credit for collecting everything.
Right. They're collecting this sample in the hopes that something down the line, maybe they can match it to a suspect. Maybe there'll be new technology, things that aren't even on the horizon yet, maybe. So they did a great job collecting the sample. And it does, in fact, play a role in this case many, many years later.
Yeah.
So we talked last week about how angry this case is going to make you. So buckle up.
It's so true.
It is. So with very few viable leads, police refocus their attention on the people in Reesa's inner circle. And soon, Reesa's best friends, Paul and Jim, are thrust into the spotlight, with the thought being one, so they had left around 4 o'clock, and it was the same time as Reesa. And two, they knew exactly where she would be. They knew she was going over to her grandma's house. So in detectives' eyes, it was certainly possible that one of them was obsessed with Reesa. They followed her over there, hoping to maybe have sex with her, given that semen was found, in that pool of blood, and something went south, and the unthinkable happened.
I mean, I get that. I mean, that was kind of what I was thinking first, just because, they left together, they went off, that was that. So I definitely, I understand that.
I do get that, especially when you don't know what happened yet. I mean, this is still day one.
Right.
So on July 17th, 3 days after the murder, detectives bring the boys, Jim and Paul. They bring them in for questioning, starting with Jim. And Jim said Reesa was one of his closest friends and he would never harm a hair on her head. In fact, he actually confesses that he has a little bit of a crush on Reesa. And that
Aw.
could not have been a bigger mistake because given the way police were thinking at the time about the motive for the crime, that's like the worst thing you can say, you know?
Anything you say will be used against you in the court of law.
Yes. So
Yeah.
the second detectives hear that, they wonder if Jim took this infatuation to a deadly level. And they grill him for hours. And he sticks to his story. He's like, we left. We took off. Paul went to his home. I went to my home. That was it. So, and although police can't really corroborate it, they suspect Jim knows more than he's letting on. But he's free to go. So next, investigators set their sights on Reese's other friend, Paul. So just like Jim, they don't hold back. They hammer him with questions. And this is a young kid. He's a high
Yeah.
schooler, you know? So also like Jim, Paul maintains his innocence and said he went right home after he left Reese's house. So again, there's no evidence linking Paul to the crime. So he's also allowed to leave.
This is giving me West Memphis 3 vibes, and I fucking hate it. I'm so stressed out for these poor boys, and I'm going to safely assume that neither of their parents were called before they were questioned, and I'm sure none of the boys knew to ask, like neither of the boys knew to ask for a lawyer, because why would they?
Yeah, and given the time period when this happened, I think
Yeah,
the rules weren't as strict as they are today about what you can and can't do.
right.
So the interrogations, they left Jim and Paul traumatized. I mean, these were kids that are just, they're reeling from the death of their friend, and now they find themselves in the hot seat, you know? And it doesn't take long for word to get around town about these group of kids that saw Reesa last. And you have this gruesome crime, and now you have these kids that are basically in the crosshairs. And Paul's family, they received countless death threats. Paul told me, he's like, it got so bad my mom had to board the windows shut. People would say that the KKK would come and kill me because he was a Moroccan kid.
Oh
So
my
for being the
God.
brown kid who murdered Reesa, he was terrified.
I can't even imagine how scary that must be. And
Yeah.
you know what? The KKK, what a bunch of fucking losers.
All right. Well, maybe not the platform to go off on the KKK, but hey, you do you, girl.
Tell it like it is.
Tell it like it is. So Paul realized that he would never be able to walk around Salisbury again without being viewed as a killer. But it's not just residents who have their like judgmental eyes on him. So police have been tracking his every move. He worked at a fast food restaurant. They showed up there. They would routinely stop him and try to get a confession out of him everywhere he went. So despite being only 16, Paul decides to pack his bags and move to California to basically start a new life. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the harassment didn't stop when he left. Police would show up. Paul told me that he was in his, I forget, maybe 20s. So a bunch of years had passed at this point, but he was with a girl. And he gets this knock on the door. So he goes and answers the door, and it's police. And they're trying to tighten the screws, you know,
Oh my God.
it never ended. It was awful. It was awful.
Poor kid was run out of town for something he didn't do. That's heartbreaking. I mean,
It's just like Thomas Minch.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For something they didn't do.
Right. So here's where we get to the linchpin in the linchpin for this entire block. This is what kind of sparked us to do this block of stories. So Reesa's sister, Jody Laird. And with Paul and Jim kind of on the back burner, detectives actually explore the notion that Jody had something to do with Reesa's death. And like Melissa always says, let that sink in. 13-year-old Jody. So 100 pounds soaking wet. And there was semen found at the scene.
Yeah, right?
So, but when detectives were interviewing all of Reesa's friends and family, sure enough, a couple people open their mouth and say, Jody was jealous of her sister. And Reesa had relationships with boys and was getting her driver's license soon. And it's like just those little things and those little offhand comments that may seem like innocuous are in police's eyes when they're looking at a certain person. Those kind of things can be detrimental.
Which is so stupid. Because first of all, you said she was like 100 pounds soaking wet. And I already said that I feel like that level of stabbing, you have to have upper body strength to do that.
Right.
But like with the jealousy, that's just typical sibling shit. Like, I'm sure my brother is jealous that I have a wildly successful podcast with like 10 people who listen.
Is that
Obviously.
counting family members or not?
Yes, and counting him.
Oh, that's counting. Oh
So,
my God.
yes, and he
Man.
and I are both jealous that our mom loves the dog more than us. So
Yeah.
it's,
I think any good dog parent loves the dog most. So
I mean, you definitely should.
yeah. And the thing to know is that police didn't necessarily think that Jody herself did it. They threw out the notion that she was like the lookout, that Paul and Jim committed the murder. Like, are you kidding me right now? She opened the door for Paul and Jim to do this to their friend. I don't think
And her
so.
sister?
I know. So before we get into the ways that police like harassed Jody, that's the word. They harassed her. I want to bring up Reese's funeral. So it took place 6 days after the murder. And this is obviously an incredibly somber event. Everyone's in tears except for Jody. And there's actually a picture of her. She was sitting front row of the church. I don't quote me, but you can maybe even see the coffin in the side of the picture. But she's sitting there, and it's just this kind of blank expression. And of course, everybody who sees that picture run in the paper is like, look at that emotionless, cold-hearted killer. Like, how could she not cry over her sister's death? It was that kind of stuff that just kind of exacerbated this whole thing.
Let's think about this. Maybe she's in shock from the trauma of losing her sister. And not only that, but like losing her sister in such a horrific way. And the fact that it happened so close, like it could have been her. You know what I mean? Like she was right there. She's laying on her bed, reading a magazine, just feet away from where this happened. And her poor little 13-year-old brain can't process that. So, of course, she has a blank expression on her face. Her poor little brain's probably like in overload.
I know. You're exactly right. And that's Jody's take on it as well.
Yeah.
So, well, the day after the funeral, we're on July 21st. Police basically tell Vicky Oakes, or their mom, they said, we think your underage daughter, Jody, had something to do with this crime. And Vicky's floored. She knows that there's no way Jody was involved. So she has no problems allowing Jody to be interrogated, be questioned by police, and grilled. Jody was grilled. And they with that theory we just talked about, they accuse her of like holding the door open or opening the door for Jim and Paul to kind of go in and do this to Reesa. And it's just absurd. It's absurd.
So ridiculous.
But so Jody sticks to her gun. She says, I went over to check on Reesa about 4:00. And when I saw my grandparents' door was closed and their car was gone, I left. So she went back to her bedroom, read her magazine until she heard her father's spine-chilling scream that he let out when he found Reese's body. So, and I should mention here that a 13-year-old at the time was too young to polygraph. So that does play a role in the story later on, because I'm sure it's like, well, I didn't just take a polygraph and call it a day. So...
And I'm guessing that neither Vicky or Jody thought about asking for a lawyer, which, like, I get, it's a small town, and I'm sure Vicky and Jody had never been involved in anything with the police. And I forget sometimes that back then there weren't shows like Law and Order and The First 48, so we kind of know what to do now. Like, they didn't have that. They didn't have that kind of helpful instruction. Like, these are your rights.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot. I mean, it's something that nobody ever expects to have to deal with. And I don't know I mean, do you know the proper protocol? Like you said, now we do, because there's so many crime shows that outline the justice system and how things. So I think people are more aware. You're absolutely right. But Jody now is like, she just lost her sister in the worst way imaginable. And now she's the prime suspect in her murder. Like, I can't even fathom that. It's wild. And it doesn't take long for word to spread around town about Jody's possible involvement. So the mother of Reesa's best friend actually worked at the local post office, and that was a place that obviously police would frequent. So the best friend of Reesa, her mom, and the cops were all buddy and chummy, and she would hear things from those detectives about Jody's involvement. So naturally it trickles down. So the best friend's mom hears this. She tells the best friend, and now all of a sudden the best friend goes on she leads this town-wide witch hunt. She rallies people, and anybody who will listen, she's telling that Jody was involved in this. So now poor Jody literally became the focus of this ire from the community for 35 years.
Oh my god. And you know, you just said the key word here, witch hunt. Like, that's exactly what this is. It's a small town, and they just want to blame someone for something.
Right.
And you know what? That lady, her Reese's best friend, I hope that she looks in the mirror every damn day and thinks, wow, I'm such a piece of shit. And if she doesn't, she should.
She
For
absolutely
doing this
should.
to Jody for 35 years.
She
Oh my
absolutely
god. I hope
should.
she can't. I don't know how she sleeps at night.
I don't know either, but there's some justice on the way, so stay tuned. So getting back to Jody, every time she would get a boyfriend, police would interrogate that boyfriend, looking for any kind of dirt on Jody, the cold-blooded killer Jody Laird. And every time she'd go into like the department to just check up on the case, to look for updates, trying to keep things alive, being the flame keeper that we've talked about, they would question her. She would get interrogated. Instead of giving her updates, they give her a raft, you know? So they're trying hoping she slips up or changes her story as they do.
Right.
So I do want to say that Jody was not the only one who endured this kind of treatment, although she's the kind of focus of what we're talking about here. Paul and Jim did as well. And Paul had learned to kind of deal with it a little better than the others, but probably because he was on the other side of the country, so maybe he wasn't as attached to the area. But Jim did not. He did have this little crush on Reesa, and so her death bothered him, and how he was being viewed as a suspect. He turned to a life of drugs and alcohol and eventually took his own life because of this.
You know, you're probably going to disagree with me, but I feel like his blood is on police's hands for that. They drove him to that.
Yeah, I mean, you hate to say that because you want to believe police are doing everything they can, but I do agree they got serious tunnel vision in this case. And there are some things that I have other thoughts on the whole Jim situation, which some of it I can share and some of it I can't. But I have things regarding Jim that will never see the light of day, things that I was entrusted with. But what I can say is the way he was treated by police and his love for Reesa is what I think did him in. And I'm glad you brought it up because this is what this whole block is about.
Exactly. Like the ripple effects of these false accusations.
So back to Jody, the years are passing and she's not getting answers. And eventually she starts a family of her own. And this is so tragically sad. I think at one point her daughter changed schools and was trying to make friends, and she wasn't allowed to come to sleepovers or parties or dances that her friends were having because of who her mom was. The suspect in her sister, like word had spread so far that she developed a reputation. And that best friend who spread all the rumors kind of about Jody, there was a Facebook group that was started. So fast forward to like 2010 when Facebook kind of became very popular.
Yeah.
There was a Facebook group about Reesa's case started, and Jody joined the group she's looking for answers, right? They kick her out of the group because of her reputation.
Oh my God.
And then she started getting nasty messages from this supposed best friend of Reesa that she has saved. I mean, she was getting all kinds of nasty stuff sent to her. And she would go to the grocery store and people would just be whispering behind her back, calling her axe murderer. And just constantly judged and kept at arm's length, which I know did prevent Jody from having meaningful, true friendships in this world. And she does now. From talking to her, it sounds like she's doing a whole lot better. But I mean, this was absolutely heartbreaking, especially when you hear it directly from her, which you're going to do next week.
Yeah, it's going to be intense.
Yeah. So in 2018, though, so let's fast forward 34 years after Reesa's death, Jody is vindicated in literally the most baller way possible.
Yay! It's my favorite part. I have goosebumps.
So Jody is now a grandmother of her own, and she's also the caretaker. Vicky has aged by now, so she's taking care of her mom. And so one day she's sitting home watching her favorite show, Dr. Phil. And on this particular day, the episode was very interesting to her because it featured a guest who was taking a polygraph test. And this was something that Jody told me. She's like, I offered to take polygraphs over the years and no one would take me up on it. So like, even when she became an adult and was able to take them, no one let her take them. So she has dreamed of such an opportunity to do this and clear her name and, more importantly, spark renewed interest, because this was obviously a cold case now for decades.
Yeah.
So what she does, she types up a letter to the producers, sends it in, and she basically thinks it's going to just sit somewhere. It'll never get answered. But she gets a call to come out to LA and film a segment. And guess who's in the front row of in that particular episode? Front and center is
that See You Next Tuesday. Her.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. The one who was behind the witch hunt to begin with. So Jody, they behind the scenes asked her a bunch of related questions as if it were a real polygraph. But on the show, they go with the big answers, like, did you kill your sister and do you know, or something like that.
The questions that were asked were, did you stab Reesa? And your answer was?
No.
Did you stab Reesa with a knife? And your answer was?
No.
And the results are that you were non-deceptive, you were telling the truth, you did not stab your sister.
And the look on that friend's face makes me so unbelievably happy.
Oh my God. I watched that episode when I found out we were doing this case. Like, you can find bits and pieces of it on YouTube. And I'm going to say it again. I hope that woman every single day looks in the mirror and thinks about what a piece of like maggot poop she is for everything that she put Jody through. And even after the results are read, this woman has the balls to pull up a picture of Jody. Like, this is all on the show. She pulls up a picture of Jody where she's got like dark hair and makeup on, and she's like, oh my God, look at how evil she is. She's gloating about what she did to Reesa right in front of everyone.
It's like you're admitting to something. She's dark there, like I have described her.
That was Halloween.
Could you not dress up as something else? Would you? I mean, that's kind
I
of
was
like
a
mocking.
vampire victim. Can you see the mark?
But it's still mocking.
I've been that. I've been a vampire victim for Halloween.
I need to get the theory here. She's dark there?
She's dark. She's mocking, more or less. I mean, could you not dress up something else for Halloween?
Well, thank you for sharing that.
The entire
crowd,
audience
oh my God,
laughs in her face. It was
right?
It was the best thing ever.
It really, really was. But the real vindication was still to come. So the episode did exactly what Jody intended. She on a national network cleared her name, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, polygraphs that's why they're not admissible in court.
Well,
but
right.
she passed this polygraph in front of a lot of people. But it also got the attention of Salisbury police, and specifically Sergeant Travis Schulenberger, who immediately called Jody after he saw the episode and wanted to make things right. I mean, he was a hero to Jody. Schulenberger tells Jody he's going to personally dig up Reese's case file, see if there's any clues that might be buried in there that were missed, and something that was maybe overlooked, years ago. And almost immediately, Schulenberger realizes there were a number of key pieces of evidence that were in the file that were never tested. And it's not that remember 1984, you couldn't do a whole lot, but it just got buried. The whole case got buried. There were pieces of evidence that could be tested before 2018, and they weren't. So
I think that happens a lot. And I think over the next couple years, we're going to see so many of those cold cases as departments get more advanced and as there's more money, I guess, to run all these tests and more labs and everything. I think we're going to see a lot of that.
And it's manpower too. It is. No. And that's we have a block coming up later on with a detective. He's a cold case detective who is so adamant about the necessity for a cold case team in every single city in America.
Absolutely.
Because there are volumes of files that are just unsolved. And I don't have the number in front of me, but it's hundreds of thousands of cold cases in America.
I would kill for that job.
You would be great at it. You would dedicate your life to it. I know you
love
would.
it.
So, well, he does realize that there's pieces of evidence that could be tested and may yield some results. And starting with the semen that was found in that blood, also the knife, and also there was a clump of hair that was actually recovered from like Risa must have clutched it. So it was found at autopsy,
Oh.
this little chunk of hair. So, and I have no idea why, and Schulenberger didn't either about why these things were never tested before that, but it didn't matter at that point. It was about, no, it didn't happen then, but it's going to happen now.
Yeah.
So, given how far technology had come over the years, Schulenberger hopes the items could provide some crucial information. So, he immediately ships each of the items off to the crime lab, and on March 5th, 2019, he gets the call. So, DNA had been found on the handle of the knife, found lodged in Risa's body, as well as the clump of hair found that she was grasping. So, and it matched the DNA sample from the semen found in the pool of blood. So now they knew one person, one man was responsible for all of these things.
Right.
So, which again wasn't really a groundbreaking. They knew that but when you see a naked woman and semen at a scene, chances are it's a man. But
Right.
regardless, so when he runs that sample through CODIS, there were no matches. But all hope is not lost because Schulenberger had been studying up. This was around the time, and I'm sure you were following it too with the Golden State Killer.
Oh,
This was
my gosh.
yeah, right. So this was around the time when genetic genealogy was coming to fruition and becoming a tool that was used by investigators. So Schulenberger immediately orders the samples from Risa's crime scene to be uploaded to GEDmatch, which is basically a consumer DNA testing site. That's like the first step to these big family trees there, where I'm not gonna get into all the DNA. We're gonna save that for later. But on April 19th, 2019, a report comes back identifying the sample as belonging to someone in the Blair family, Blair, family of Salisbury. So for the next several weeks, Schulenberger gets with genealogists to kind of reverse engineer the Blair family tree to determine some possible suspects. And after narrowing down the results, there was one name that rose to the top, and that was Curtis Edward Blair.
Wow. That whole genealogy matching, it's amazing.
I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that because I want to do a big DNA block later.
Oh, for sure.
Really, yeah. So, but it's so cool how this stuff
It's
works.
so cool. Yeah.
And it's what I find cool about it is it's not NASA technology. This is basic. Go to the library and find things out. Like it's old school
I
investigating.
love
you know?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So a background check reveals that Blair, who's an African American, had a violent criminal history. On May 21st, 1966, this is from an article that I had pulled, by the way, and I was like so proud of myself because we could not find anything on this guy. So thank you, newspapers.com. Brought to you by newspapers.com.
News.com.
Oh my God. So on May, please. On May 21st, 1966, around 1:30 a.m., Blair arrived home to his apartment on North Long Street in Salisbury and got into an argument with his wife, Elmira. The fight escalated and Blair grabbed a butcher knife from the counter. Elmira scooped up the couple's 2.5-year-old daughter and ran into the bedroom. Blair chased them down and sliced Elmira several times in the leg, then proceeded to stab his own daughter in the abdomen. Blair was immediately arrested and his wife and child were taken to the hospital. They both miraculously survived, but Blair was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. That's why he slid through the cracks, because this happened before people were required to submit a DNA sample. So therefore, he would never appear in CODIS if he didn't do anything wrong between 1966 and now, 2018, you know?
Real quick, not related quite to this case, but this reminds me of Luis Perez from Bruce Blackwood. Like, he tried to kill his child and the mother of his child. Like, that's
It's
wild.
so eerie.
Yeah.
Like, what are the odds that 2 cases out of how many we covered? 11?
Right. Like, isn't that
what?
crazy? Like, I just thought of that and I was like, oof.
Yeah. So records show that following his release from prison, the then 40-year-old Blair began working at the Frito-Lay factory in Salisbury, which was literally a block and a half from Risa's house. It was just up and around the corner. It was this big tan factory. And shockingly, as Schulenberger reviews the files from 1984, he sees Blair's name appear as an early person of interest. So locals had remember locals had seen a black man running from the Trexler home close to the time of the murder.
The guy said he saw a black man running away. The afternoon delight guy.
Yeah, exactly. So so maybe he wasn't crazy after all. Maybe he wasn't just passing blame. So
Oh.
they had actually stopped. I guess they were during the neighborhood canvass. They had stopped Blair while he was walking home from work, and he was briefly questioned. And the lead was quickly dismissed because eyewitnesses, the accounts were so inconsistent. It was just a black man. We didn't know what he was wearing, this and that. So it was kind of like, I don't know. He was just kind of pushed to the side in those initial stages. But there's also a problem. As Schulenberger is trying to figure out where Blair is now, he learns Blair died of acute ventricle failure and congestive heart failure in 2004 in San Diego, California. Which,
Hopefully he suffered.
right, and which meant though for the case that he could never be arrested or charged with anything, and that kind of that's damning. That sucks for the family. It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. But Schulenberger knows he still may be able to close the case. So in June of 2019, he obtains an order to exhume Blair's body to test it against the DNA from the crime scene. Sure enough, it's a match.
Wow.
So, yep. So, given what he knows, obviously Curtis Edward Blair can never be tried. He can never be charged. But investigators piece together what they think happened based on now what they know. So, he believes that this was essentially a crime of opportunity committed by a brazen sexual predator.
That's the scariest kind because there's no like victim profile. It's not like the same. There's no rhyme or reason. There was no connection with them.
Right. It's so random. So any corner of America, any race, color, or creed, no one is safe. No one is safe anywhere. So on the afternoon of June 14th, Blair was likely walking home from his job at the Frito-Lay factory and crossed paths with Reesa at the exact time that she was walking to her grandparents' house. And when Blair saw that no one was home, he followed Reesa inside, barged in, and grabbed a knife from the butcher block in the kitchen and basically overpowered the much younger, much weaker Reesa Trexler. And he took this knife and began stabbing her and slashing her just like he did with his own wife in 1966 and had his way with her. And as soon as he was done, he quickly left before anybody even knew what happened. So, and then she sat there until Walt found her. On December 3rd, 2019, so now we're 35 years after Reese's death.
Oh my God.
The Salisbury police hold a press conference to announce that the case is finally closed. And this is an interesting, this was, for us, it was like no case I'd ever worked because it almost caused us not to be able to do the case because they didn't name the guy. I'd never heard that because legally, are we ready to drag Curtis Edward Blair through the mud when his name was technically never released by police? And the reason for that, this took the work of a reporter, a local reporter named Dave and I can't ever pronounce his name, Wisnant or Wisenhunt, but what he did is he found out where police, the story had broke that the case was being closed. It was rapid. There was going to be an announcement. So he finds out where police had gotten the exhumation order and he tracks down who was in that grave. So that's how the name Curtis Edward Blair even became public. So if it were up to police, and Schulenberger, when we did his interview, he was instructed not to say the name Curtis Edward Blair. So we had Jody say it. She'll say it all day. But
yeah, and we're going to say it. We're going to say it now. Curtis Edward Blair brutally murdered Reesa Trexler.
Say it louder for people in the back. So
seriously.
This lowlife literally destroyed one life horrifically, and a whole bunch of others that were just kind of caught in the wake of his actions. And 35 years, all of this pain, all this heartache, and it turned out to be a crime of opportunity committed by some horny psychopath. And
he got to go on and live his life.
Yes, he did. And I hope Jody is very forgiving. Jody is the sweetest pie, but I hope this guy's burning in hell. And this only affected me through me telling the story and meeting these people, but she has a heart of gold and I would be so furious. I'm furious for her. So Jody, I got you. I'll be mad for you, girl.
We're mad.
We're mad for you. So there is a kind of a big silver lining here. And this is the biggest takeaway from the case, that I think was so helpful to helping Jodi move on. So at the end of that press conference, Schollenberger announces publicly that Jodi Laird has finally been cleared as a suspect. And I know
Aw.
that was the moment that Jodi felt this weight lifted off her shoulders.
In August 6, 2019, North Carolina State Crime Lab reports that the major contributor from the sperm fraction of the vaginal swab profile is consistent with the DNA profile obtained from the body. The suspect identified through DNA is now deceased. In the absence of courtroom due process and conviction by a jury, his identity is not being released. The Salisbury Police Department and State Bureau of Investigations does consider this case solved and now closed. Jodi Trexler was instrumental in bringing this case back to the forefront. We would like to say that Jodi has been completely exonerated in this case, and the suspect has no connection to the Trexler or the Monroe family. Thank you.
I can't imagine, like, you're holding your breath for 35 years, and Jodi is just the most kind, compassionate, and empathetic human I've ever had the privilege of meeting, and it's disgusting, and I hate it that she suffered for so long. And like, if you think, I was thinking about this, and like, she's lived a life that you and I will hopefully never imagine, but could not even begin to imagine. Like, I'm already paranoid enough if I walk into the grocery store and people like look at me and start talking. I'm like, oh my God, like they're talking about, like, I can't
Yeah.
even imagine being in that situation that she was in.
I know. And she's lived a hard life because of it. And it's, I feel awful for her now, but I'll tell you what, I am so honored that I got to say that I got to produce and tell this story on not just here, but on a show like Cold Case Files, because the woman you're going to meet next week is someone who I'm very proud to call my friend, and someone who I will always go to bat for. And I like telling Reesa's story because Reesa was incredible and she was taken long before her time, but her sister has also been a victim in this, and the story needs to be heard. These people can't be forgotten.
It's a tough case, but you know what? Jodi is so inspirational, so I'm really looking forward to next week.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, Ed, thank you for sharing that with us. I encourage everyone to go watch the Dr. Phil episode and laugh at that lady when
and watch Jodi get hers.
Exactly. It's amazing. In the meantime, if you have anything to say about this case, we'd love to hear it. You can hit us up on socials, Facebook, Insta, TikTok at Murder Unscripted. You can check out our website, murderunscriptedpod.com, or you can even email us at murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com. Where else can they reach us? I think that's it. But
we're doing stickers.
We're still doing stickers. If you leave us a review on any of the like Apple, Spotify, wherever you want, screenshot the review, DM us with it, email us, whatever you want to do. Just give us your address as well, and we will send you a super fun Murder Unscripted sticker.
We will.
And I think that is all we have. So until next week, remember, hug your friends, don't judge people, and perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
You always talk about me needing a sign. I've seen your search history, girl.
Yeah, I need a sign.
If anybody needs a sign.